this morning, so during this summer, we've been working our way through the letters of Paul. So this morning, rather than the sort of typical three-point sermon or thematic sermon, we're just going to be wandering our way through the book of Philippians. And thematically, one of the things we've been doing is we've been noticing some of the emotions that we've been finding in the various books. So we've noticed that Galatians was an angry book, or 2 Corinthians was also actually a fairly angry book, and so on. So it's sort of nice to get to Philippians and then find some joy. That Paul is genuinely joyful. I'm sort of hoping this morning that our Nigerian guests were going to help us a little bit through some of the songs, express our joy a little bit more, because we are very quiet in our joy here in the Church of the Brethren in the Mennonite Church. So maybe if you come back a few more weeks, you can teach us some joy, so we can not just talk about joy, but actually express some of it a little bit more in our services. But this is a very odd book to be a joyful book, because Paul is writing this book in jail. And I was thinking about this week and thinking, if I suddenly found myself in jail, and I was going to write a letter to some friends, I'm guessing that joy wouldn't be my major theme. I might be angry, I might be frustrated, I can imagine all sorts of negative emotions that would be welling up, or I might even find some hope, but joy just wouldn't be like even in the top 10 emotions that I can imagine feeling while sitting in jail. Now, Paul knows that he's not going to be in jail for very long, because in the ancient world they didn't really do long jail sentences, so he doesn't have to worry about this stretching out. It's probably going to be fairly soon until he has a trial, and they're going to do something about this, like say having beaten, or lashed, or killed, or thrown out of town, right? So while he doesn't look forward to a long time in jail, he certainly has nothing to look forward to in general. And you can see this in the part of Philippians where he's saying, yeah, well, I might die, I might stay alive. Not sure which is better. And yet, in this circumstance, he finds joy. And so there's some really important things about joy that he teaches us. Right? One of the things he teaches us is that his joy comes from others. That is certainly possible to be joyful alone, but there's also lots of times when it's hard to find joy inside of ourselves. That what the things that are happening around us do not lead naturally to joy, like Paul in prison. And he doesn't sit there and go, wow, prison's a great place, I love prison, prison's a blast, you guys should all come here too. Right? He's got to find his joy somewhere else. And so one of the places he clearly finds his joy, right, is in the Philippian church, that they're somewhere else, right, but he knows about them. And he says, now, what you guys are doing makes me joyful, and the things that are happening among you, that's what makes me joyful. So Paul finds joy in others. Paul also finds joy in expectation, that sometimes what's happening to us right now, right, doesn't feel very joyful. But Paul lives his life in hope. Right? He hopes that someday, or he knows that someday, right, because of his faith in the God who is making all things new, the God who is transforming the world. And it is this that brings him joy, so that even now as he thinks about the possibility of dying, he goes, yeah, that'd be okay. I get to be with God. But staying around, that'd be even better, because I get to be with you. Right? Currently, not so good. But that doesn't matter. So Paul has this very odd sense of joy. Right? It's not a matter of, oh, look at all the things I've got, I am joyful. Or, look at all the great things that are happening to me, I am joyful. But rather, oh look, I'm sitting in jail. Wow, this is great. Well, actually, no it isn't. But you guys are great. Right? And what we have together is great, and the faith we share in Jesus, this is great, and in this we find our joy not necessarily in the circumstances we're in. And, right, I mean, we're looking at the events that are going on in Virginia, and I think Paul would say, we need to rejoice. But I don't know how he would do that. But I can just imagine him doing that. And part of it, right, is that, right, these people were marching, but the faith leaders were there. Right? There was a whole crowd of pastors and other faith leaders standing there saying no, right, or saying yes to a different vision. Right? And so even in all of the horrible things, there were things to rejoice over. The people who were there in the counter-demonstration, the counter-visions, the thousands of sermons that are being preached this morning across this nation and across the world to say no to what happened this weekend. All of these things. So that's one part of Philippians that is worth just thinking about for a little bit more than we tend to. Another thing that we read this morning, that we read together, is the famous hymn from chapter 2. And we really don't know if Paul actually wrote this hymn. He may just be borrowing it. It may be a common thing that was read. And I don't know how many books have been written on this particular passage, or how many millions of sermons have been preached on it, but certainly more than we care to think about. And also, just to recognize how very complex this all is, but it gives us this really interesting view into the life of the early church and what they thought about Jesus. And one of the things they clearly highlighted about Jesus is humility. And again, we see this incredible contrast to what happened right in Virginia this week, where this is not right the neo-Nazi movement and the white supremacy movement. This isn't a humility movement. This isn't a regarding others as better for ourselves movement. And this isn't a joy movement, right? It's hatred and supremacy, and we are better, and we are more righteous, and we are this, and we are that. And Paul says, yeah, but or we could be like Jesus, who, was, who did not think about his own equality with God as something even to be worried about. Right? He just, let's go down and be a servant. Right? This sense of obedience and humility is such an amazing contrast to what we see in the white supremacy movement. Even as horrible as this is, so many of the leaders there, right, claim to Christianity as their faith. But not a Christianity that is found in this book anyway. I don't know where they get it from. Another cool part of the book of Philippians is Paul's sort of backwards conversion story. So there's usually a pattern to a good conversion story. Right? A good conversion story starts with somebody standing up and saying, these are all the horrible things I used to do. Right? Oh, I used to drink this, and I used to put that in my body, and I used to do these things, and I used to do that things. Right? And if you're good at this sort of story, you can stretch this out for a long, long time. Right? Because everybody likes to hear about all the bad things somebody else used to do. Right? Right? Because I don't know, right, how this works. But anyway, there's nothing better than hearing about all the fun people used to have. Right? And then at some point you go, yes, but Jesus came and he saved me from all that. He saved me from all that fun I used to have. And now, right, they don't quite say it that way, right? But now I have been redeemed, and I'm living the American dream now. And everything is fine in my life now. Jesus saved me from all that horribleness. Which is an important story. Don't get me wrong here, right? And because it's important to proclaim the victory of God over sin. And it's important to proclaim the fact that however much people today, right, are living all sorts of horrible lives and doing all sorts of terrible things to themselves and to others, right? Even, right, people have come out of militant Nazism and neo-Nazi movements and white supremacist movements and actually found Jesus. This is a possibility. And so it's good to proclaim these stories of transformation. But Paul has a very odd story of transformation. Right? So in Hebrews in chapter 3, he starts out, right, circumcised on the 8th day, right? I've been a good Jew since birth. I have been a true follower of God, right, since like the 8th day of my life. My parents were good, solid Jews. Member of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew born of Hebrews. I can trace my goodness back generations. However good you think you were, I was better, right? Generationally, my parents were good and my grandparents were good, right? We were just all good. As to the law, a Pharisee, right? So not only was I raised good, but I kept on being good. And I studied how to be even better. And I studied all of these rules. And I kept learning and learning and learning. Right? So this is the story of a man who has so many things going for him. As to zeal, a persecutor of the church. So I didn't just study this stuff, I did it. Right? And anybody who disagreed with me, I came down on them hard. Because I knew the truth, and I was living the truth, and there were these people who weren't living the truth. Right? So I went after them because I was good. And as to righteousness under the law, blameless. Wow. I wasn't just good. I was perfect. That's how good I was. I often tell my students at university that this is the sort of thing that as a pastor you never ever get to say, because it leads to unemployment very quickly. Right? But, right, which of us can say that? But this Paul, right, in his usual humility, right, says, as to righteousness under the law, blameless, but God saved me from all that. God saved me from all my righteousness. And he doesn't say self-righteousness. He doesn't say I thought I was good. He says, no, I was good. However good you think you are, I was gooder than that. Right? And Paul says, but God saved me from my righteousness and now has raised me up so that I am in jail. Right? Paul the persecutor, Paul the one with a sword in his hand, going out to tell the rest of the world how to live their lives, has now been raised by Christ to be in jail. Hallelujah. Amen. Yeah, not a lot of amens for that one, right? Amen. There we go. Right? It's a very odd sort of story. And it's sort of, right? Because in some ways, some of us could tell that sort of story. Right? I can tell that sort of story. I'm not going to go that extreme, right? But my parents were Mennonite. My dad was a Mennonite pastor. My grandfather on both sides were leaders in their community. You know, I was a good boy. I was probably like way too good, but I was a good boy, and I followed all the rules. I never fought with my parents. You know, even as a teenager, you know, I liked my dad. Right? And I mean, not a lot of people can actually say that, right? But I can say that. As a teenager, I liked my dad. He liked me. We got along pretty much most of the time. Right? And I went to Bible school like a good boy, and I went to this Mennonite school and that Mennonite school and the other Mennonite school. And after going to Mennonite schools, I went to Lutheran schools and Catholic schools. I was good. Right? And now here I am. Oh yeah, no, I'm just a pastor. Paul goes, no, that's not good enough. You should be in jail. That would be a goal worth getting to. Right? And my kids say that to me once in a while too. Dad, you know, you haven't got yourself arrested yet. What's going on here? Well, yeah, I know, but I'm a little scared. Right? And Paul, I just can't imagine what Paul would say to me. Like Wes, you're afraid to go to jail for Jesus? I mean, seriously? You don't think Jesus is going to take care of you? This is your faith? That's pretty sad, Wes. And yeah, that's pretty sad. Right? If I'm afraid to go to jail, Paul, right? if I want to know Christ, verse 10, and the power of his resurrection, and the sharing of his suffering by becoming like him in his death, if somehow I may attain the resurrection from the dead. Right? Because Paul says this whole resurrection thing has a first step. Right? There's a step before resurrection. What's the step before resurrection? You've got to die first. You don't get to be resurrected until you die. So Paul says, yeah, you know, and when we've messed this up theologically, we've said, oh, Jesus' death was the death. That was the death, and it was, you know, never to be repeated, the one death. And Paul goes, no. Right? Jesus' death was a death, an important death, you know, in all sorts of ways, but you too. Your death can also be important, and it can lead to your resurrection. There's still so many things in this old book that are still surprising. Another part we read in Philippians was about Euodia and Syntyche. And this is the sum total of everything we know. These are two women, by the way. These are our feminine names. This is the sum total of everything we know. So imagine this, right? This is our little church in Philippi here, and we got this letter from Paul. Now this letter from Paul probably came with a reader. So the person who wrote the letter physically probably also delivered the letter physically to the church in Philippi and read it to them. Right, so this would have been a person who was a professional writer and reader, likely. Okay? And so we're all sitting there, we've never heard this letter before, and all of a sudden this person says, oh, by the way, you and you need to get along. Now, there's lots of churches around the world where people get called out. I don't know, do they do this in the church of Nigeria? Does the pastor say, oh, you must behave? Yes, they don't do that here. Right? If I did that in church here, this would not be good. Right? But in other cultures, this is fairly common. But in any case, right? So I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to be of one mind. One of the interesting things here is that Paul doesn't say who's right. There's clearly two women in the church who are not getting along. And Paul doesn't say, I urge Euodia to agree with Syntyche because she's right, and Euodia should just shut up and listen. Right? Neither does Paul say, I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche both to agree with me because I'm always right. But rather, what's most important is that these two be of one mind, whatever that is going to be. Right? But we know this. Right? We know that when people in church are not getting along for whatever reason, it affects the whole body. Right? Everybody sort of tiptoes around them. Right? It's passing the peace, and suddenly you get two people who walk past each other passing the peace. Right? And then everybody else isn't sure what to do about this. Right? This affects the church. And Paul says this is really important. And not only are these two women supposed to be of one mind, right, but what are the rest of them supposed to do? Where is this? It's here somewhere. Right? Right? Help these women. So this is also our task. That when you see people in the church who aren't quite getting along, help these women, help these people, right? Because this is important, because we are the body of Christ. Right? And if the body of Christ is not functioning as a unit, and it doesn't mean we all have to believe the same thing, right? But it does mean that, right, somehow, in some sense, we have to be of one mind. We have to be moving forward together. We have to be getting along as the body, right? Not, again, to be the same. Because let's face it, right? If you look around, right, the people around in this room, if we all had to think the same, it wouldn't happen. We have far too many strong personalities here for that ever to happen. Right? And yet, we do. Right? One of the things that people ask me about my church, and I say, one of the remarkable things about this church is that this is a group of people who's decided to get along. Doesn't mean they all agree with each other. Doesn't mean they're all the same by any standard. And yet, we have decided to get along. And this is quite a feat for a church. Because you don't have to go very far from here to find churches that don't all get along. And we were at the conference, we were hearing about one church where they had a board of elders and a church council, and the church council didn't trust the board of elders. You can imagine how well this is going to work, right? Especially because they're looking for a pastor, and that is not going to end well. Right? And I'm so glad I'm your pastor and not theirs. So yes. Thank you for that commitment, and let's just keep doing this. And finally, Paul actually says that twice in Philippians. Now, usually in Paul's letters, he has a sort of ending, some sort of blessing in the middle of the letter, and then he keeps on going, right? Like a good preacher, right? You end, and then you got to keep going because there's always more to say. But Paul in Philippians actually has 5 endings. Right? Now, Paul also doesn't have a word processor. Right? He's probably dictating this on the fly, and then he comes and he has his ending and he goes, oh, wait a minute, I forgot something, right? And this is a little more than, oh, wait a minute, right? And he can't go back and, right, cut and paste. Right? So it's not very surprising. In some ways, the extreme organization of some of his letters is much more surprising than the slight disorganization of Philippians. But and finally, which also means that if you're ever worship leading and you need a blessing at some point in the service, right, Philippians is a good resource because there's a lot of them, and I'm going to be using one of them at the end here. So that is our quick walk through Philippians. The sort of thing that we will do in Bible study if you actually want